Hi everyone, we are here with Carina Hesper. She's an artist from Netherlands and she's presenting here in the fair for the publisher section her work. Like a pearl in my hand that Carina, you published it with a Rescue Connection. This is a Dutch publisher a few years ago. Yeah. And this is a limited edition of 32 prints that are full coated with black thermochromatic ink. So in a way is a sort of quite unusual way to present a book. Yeah. So maybe we can start our conversation with the origin of this idea.
Thank you for introduction. Yeah, so I'm a visual artist and I always try to make projects which are multisensory in a sense. So how I came up with the idea of this book, which is covered with thermochromatic ink, is actually I first did the research into the ink. As a child, I used to have a cup which changed image when I drank hot chocolate out of it, and I was wondering 12 years later what is actually the technique of this ink. And then I did several tests on several images like landscape and portrait, but I thought it was a great trick, but it was always staying a trick, so there was no extra layer to it. And then I was actually photographing albino girl for a different project, and she tried to explain to me how difficult it was to explain to her own sister what she could and what she could not see, because she had like 5% sight. And this was really this light bulb moment for me, where I realized, okay, if the subject matter is related to the technique, then it makes it really much stronger. And that's how I came up with the idea.
It was a nice, perfect project for experience this kind of thermochromatic ink and thermochromatic and multisensory experience.
Yeah, the subject matter was really perfect, fit the thermochromatic ink. And then coincidentally I was in China for another residency for different projects, and I was actually telling somebody like I would like to make this project combining blind with thermochromatic ink. And the coincidence, or I don't really believe in coincidence, but the coincidence happened that she said I was in an orphanage last week, and it was all about visual impairment, so you have to go there. And I went there and it really touched my heart, and then I knew, okay, this is my project and this is what I'm going to do.
Okay, so you went in China first for a few weeks, and then you decided to go back to do pictures in the idea to develop a project.
Yeah, I met the orphanage and I met the kids, and of course, yeah, I didn't bring the right equipment, so I didn't have I needed a light, like an artificial light to create because I wanted to create the same kind of atmosphere for the portraits. So not documentary, but more like studio focused. So I made a couple of portraits and I met them, and then I decided to come back 1 year later in 2013. And that was a very fixed period where I really focused on taking all the portraits of the kids in several locations of the orphanage.
So yeah, you as we say, this is not just a book, but is a multi-sensorial experience, and I think you want to push the audience and the viewer to feel something, and maybe we can show some images, sure. Because
like present the real image, right?
So here you have the print, and the ink is thermochromatic, and it reveals portraits with the warmth, by the warmth of your hands, of our hands. So it's in a sense a unique experience, because if I touch it, it becomes different.
Yeah, everybody has I will get a new one. This is nice. But everybody has a unique hand and a unique temperature also. So it's always different also depending on room temperature. So it's always a unique experience. And I think it's, for instance, for this image, it's quite a strong image because he has a partly open face. And maybe it's an image you normally don't want to see. But as soon as you touched it, you related to it in a different way than seeing. So maybe, you relate to the image anyway because you touched it. And that's the way the kids see. So that's also my personal experience I wanted to bring to a broader audience. Like when I met the kids, they touched me immediately. Like 2 seconds after meeting them, they touched my face. And for me, this is a very intimate gesture, but for them it's very normal because it's the way they see. And I really like the fact that you, if it's very cold, for instance, in a room, it's very hard to see the image. And that's also, you really have to do an effort to see them. And it's a different way of digesting an image, I think. And that's what I really love about it.
Of course, and I think you need to reveal these stories, because I think that in China there's a lot of children that are abandoned, where parents know that they are visually impaired, or so I think is a sort of hidden history that you want to reveal too.
Yes, exactly, and also it's very important to show all the layers which come with this problematic situation, because of course, for instance, in Europe where I live, you have this safety net if you get a disabled child, but in China it's more or less like they don't exist. So they pretend they don't exist, but they do exist. And I was also able to take pictures because it's an orphanage of French origin. Yeah. A Chinese one would never let me because it doesn't exist. And it's extremely hard as a parent if you get a disabled child. How can you keep the child? During the time of making this project, the one-child policy was still active. But actually, the government decided you can have a second one if your first child is disabled, so it really doesn't count. But it's also very complicated as a parent. I mean, it's your pension in a sense, but it's also maybe you don't have the knowledge about medical care, or maybe you don't have the money, and then there's this huge shame culture in China where they think, well, maybe you did something wrong, and that's why you have a disabled child, so you're punished for something. And with my book, I really wanted to bring this nuance to the surface, that it's so easy to maybe judge parents in China because it's a very harsh decision to neglect your child, but if you know more about the subject matter and if you know the background, you can totally understand it. Yeah.
Of course, it is maybe sort of a protest, and you try to give them voice, and to let them, to hear these stories. And I find your book close to fine arts, because you show already these images, so in museum, and but I find it super political too, and I'm curious about the reaction of Chinese people when they saw this work.
Yeah, I was also a bit nervous when traveling back to China in 2017 because I was aware of the fact that it's slightly political, but I think the thing in China is that the thing which makes you scared the most is that you don't really know where the line is, which is what is okay and what is not okay, like censorship-wise. And I was actually quite surprised. I had a book launch at Three Shadows in Beijing, and actually all the Chinese people I talked to said, I think it's a very warm-hearted project about this topic, and yeah, it's not like they're not aware that these people exist, but yeah, it's really, maybe it's, yeah, correct to say that's very government driven to hide it. And I don't really know the exact reason for it, but yeah, I was actually surprised. I was more afraid of the political part of it. The fact I really, well, it's a coincidence in that sense that it's Chinese people, but of course for this project I love it that it's politically engaged in a sense. It makes it even stronger. But I was surprised by the fact that for the Chinese it was actually not that political, or yeah, it was a very, they said, most of them said it's a very beautiful way of showing this project,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
this subject matter in a, and yeah. Yeah, so but I think that's the thing with political things in China. You never know where it's okay and where it's not okay anymore. And that's why there is a lot of self-censorship, because you just want to protect yourself and not cross the border.
But I think this is a nice way to show this reality without judgment
Yeah.
for parents or for,
Yeah.
China.
Yeah.
And I feel that it's so important for you to show this story, to bring this story to here, and yeah, something that is maybe personal for you, or why it's so important for you to tell us the stories of
I think
those kids.
yeah, I think if it's a very, yeah, well, maybe it's true that if you make a work as an artist, you make it for yourself. So maybe it was also a way for me to step out of the dark and to say, okay, this is who I am. But I think I was also very inspired by the kids, and also surprised in a sense. I mean, if you go there, I knew I was going to visit an orphanage, but I didn't know how I would feel meeting 60 disabled kids at once. And something, maybe your ego thinks, okay, we're going to prepare for this, and I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to protect myself. Or you just try to prepare, but then if you're very honest afterwards, you think, I could never prepare for this because I don't know how I will respond. And that's maybe exactly the core thing of my book also, that I wanted to bring this personal experience to my broader audience. Like, yeah, you always try to have a grip on people or a situation, but what if you don't have a grip, and if you try to be open-minded? And yeah, maybe I discovered that I'm more related to the children, even though I'm not visual impaired and I have a much easier life than they have. But I was very much inspired by the fact that they have so much liveliness in them. And I spent more than a week with them. And in the beginning, you really see their disability. But after a couple of days, you just play with them like normal children.
Yeah.
They're kids. And that's also how I wanted to photograph them, in their liveliness and in they are a character. And I think that's also what the French orphanage, that's one of the most important lessons they teach them when they're there. They say, okay, you have a disability, but you are not your disability. You are a person with a personality, and it's very important. Yeah, to take the space to be that, and not only be judged by your disability. Yeah, so that's yeah, I think for this it worked really nicely to I think one of the things for me is to approach my audience like how can you open up, and how can you have less prejudice about what you see. And maybe also, how can a topic which is so far away from where you live maybe, and which is really not part of your daily life, become part of who you are because you touched it? Or I think for me personally, it's a very different story if I read something in the newspapers, which is quite shocking, and then if I see an image which I don't want to see, I can turn my head, but if I touched it, it's totally different.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Carina, I think we are at the end of our conversation. For me, it was super nice to discover this work, and
Thank you.
I really want to thank you for sharing with us your work. Because you bring with you since 5 years, and I think it's super important, to know this story. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay.